God is, and then you could follow that with various phrases or at least various terms. You could just stop there and say God is. It might not be the best grammar, but it would be true that God simply is. This morning, God is light. What is the message of Christianity? Or the message of the Bible? To be a bit more general, but let's go specific and say of Christianity. What's the message that we are to take to the world? What is the message that hopefully we have received? Once more, there are a few different ways to answer that, and we're not going to try to say this is the only answer this morning. But there is one answer to that question that might surprise us. So if you haven't already, open up your Bible with me now, or tap with me. Well, I'm not going to tap, but you know what I mean. To 1 John, the letter that we call 1 John. 1 John 1:5. The first four verses are very similar to the first few verses of John's gospel account. He starts with something that was from the beginning. Came and they were, as the apostles and others, were able to interact with this one, this word of life called Jesus in verses 1 through 4 of 1 John. And so as John writes this letter to Christians, this is what he then says. 1 John 1, verse 5. This is the message. This is the message we have heard from him, that is from Jesus, from this word of life, this Son of God, 1 through 4, and proclaim to you. So here is one way of expressing in one statement the message of Christianity. The message that comes from Jesus and the message that Jesus' apostles and his disciples are to proclaim or preach and teach and share with other people. This is, John says, the message. Here it is. That God is light. So, just to make sure, if we didn't know this before, the title of this sermon this morning, I usually say I stole that. This morning, let's just say I'm borrowing it from 1 John 1:5. We hear quite a bit that God is light, which also comes from 1 John later in chapter 4. But here, at the beginning of this letter, he says, this is the message. God is light. And then to make sure that it's clear, he then qualifies that message and says, and in him is no darkness at all. There's no darkness, no shadow. God is light. God is pure and holy. God is real and true. God is alive. God is consuming. God is light. And so as we consider the message this morning that God is light, let's take this statement, this message, this concept of God being light, of God being compared to light, and look at it in a couple of different ways together. We're going to leave this context for the time being and look at some other passages as well. But let's consider this morning, first, the light itself. What is this light? What do we mean when we say that God is light? I realize I already threw out some other terms like holy and true. Let's explore that a little more. What do we mean by God is light? Then, the other half, if you will, of this sermon is from darkness, and then we'll fill that in momentarily. The light from darkness. First then, the light. We've recently had some storms last couple of nights here in this area of the world. Most of Oklahoma, it seems, has had some thunderstorms, lightning, and some pretty strong winds, all of that recently. I'd like to think with me this morning of the power of just that light. That it doesn't matter how dark the night is, That lightning strike illuminates. And there's times when you can stand maybe on a somewhat of an elevated plane. I mean, you don't get super high in western Oklahoma, so you find that little area, but maybe where you can look at least over something, over the flat land, and it can be the darkest night ever. It's like the moon has disappeared. It's not, and then it happens. And for just that brief moment, there are times when you can see many different things that you could not see before. And it's a very simple concept, right? We learned it at an early age. That no matter how dark the night, a bright light changes where you can see. That's one of the things about light. And I used the term this morning, revelation. That light has a revealing power. Darkness conceals, it hides. That's why if we've done something, we want to hide, and we might even hide in the dark in our shame. But light has this revelation quality. It reveals. It exposes. You hold something up to the light to see it better or clearer. You can't escape the light, if you will. So let's stay in 1 John for just a moment and read the next verse. 1 John 1, verse 6. He writes this, after he says God is light and there's no darkness in him, he says, if we say we have fellowship with him, if we say that we're connected to God, we're joined with him, we're with God. Later he'll say, if we say I know God, here it's if we say that we have fellowship with him while we walk in darkness, we lie, for one thing, and do not practice the truth. Or more bluntly or straightly, we're not doing what is true. Because that is a part of the nature of light in a physical sense. And here you might use the word metaphor or analogy. It's not that God literally is light, but it is a part of who he is, in that his purity, his holiness, his truthfulness exposes. And that's just the way light is. It's just the way then that God is. That if I'm going to try to have a connection with God while living in Satan's darkness, if I'm not willing to leave that, not that I'm going to be sinless, but to fight back and leave, step out of darkness, can't have it both ways then. I can't somehow hide in the darkness in my sin and be connected and close to a God who has no darkness in him at all. It makes it uncomfortable then to come to terms with who God is, with his reality, with the truths of God about how I'm living. I can't somehow come to God and expect, well, I can just keep living the way I'm living in darkness, and his light won't expose me. Let's go back now to John's gospel account, John chapter 3. We're going to read verses 19 through 21 together. This is in the same context as Jesus' interaction with Nicodemus. It's John 3:16, that context. But as we near the end of this paragraph, John chapter 3, verse 19, he begins to speak of judgment. And he uses this light versus darkness. And we find this in the Bible more than once, where light and darkness are in this constant struggle. They're at war. You think about it back on the physical level. Light destroys darkness, dissipates darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. Light reveals. First, here we look here at John chapter 3, verse 19. He says, this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed. There's that word again. Because of the exposure of light. So if I love darkness, I love the way I'm living, I love my sin, I love the pleasures of sin, then God is light, revelation. I might not want to come close. But then he goes on to add this. He says, but whoever does what is true. Look at that. 1 John 1:6 says, if I'm in darkness and try to say I'm with God who is light, I'm lying and not doing what is true. But here he says, whoever does what is true, whoever is seeking to live and walk in God's light, then that person, he says, comes to the light so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. If I really want to come to God, if I really want to come to Jesus, as we say, that means my sin and the fact that I'm not what I should be, it's going to be made clear. It's going to be exposed. There's going to be some light shed, as we say, on who I am. That doesn't mean I have to stay that way, but that's one of the aspects of light, revelation. Then, I also think of how light brings illumination. And I realize that revelation and illumination are very similar ideas, but I'm using the word illumination this morning to emphasize light, its guiding power. Light has this ability to lead and guide. When you go out at night, maybe it's to check on some animals, or it's just to go and check on the noise you heard at the back of the house. You'll likely bring some light source with you. It might be a lantern, it might be some type of flashlight. You might bring something to guide your way. You could add this on top and say, because light exposes or reveals things, it illuminates your path. Now, let's stay in John and turn to John chapter 8. John 8, verse 12. John 8:12. Jesus makes this declaration twice in John's writings. But here's one example of that. John chapter 8, verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. If we didn't know this back in John chapter 3, when he says the light has come into the world, and if you come to the light, now we know who that light is. Jesus has come into the world. The light of the world has come. Then he says this. Verse 12 also says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Without Jesus, without his words, without his nature, his person, we might find some form of light. We might find something to base our lives on. We might find some guide out there. But without Jesus, we are left. And I don't mean this in a trite way. We're left in the dark. And that's why we could survey philosophies and worldviews. We could discuss different things and different examples of ways that people over the centuries have tried to find the light, tried to guide their lives. But when I follow Jesus, as he says here, I don't have to walk in darkness anymore. I can have my sins, those sins that make me uncomfortable in the light, I can have those cleansed. And I have access to the truth of God. I have access to his word. I have access to the guide for my ethical choices, my daily decisions. Is this right? Is this wrong? I don't have to wander around and stumble in the dark anymore. I have the illumination of the light of the world. Let's look at one more example in John chapter 12 now. John 12, 35 and 36, and then we'll drop down to verse 46, as Jesus discusses his upcoming death in a fairly subtle way here. Here's what he says about light and darkness. John 12:35. So Jesus said to them, the light is among you for a little while longer. I'm just going to be here a little while longer. Walk while you have the light. Take advantage of this. Seize the opportunity to get to know me, lest darkness overtake you. The one who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. Jesus picks up that, as we said, simple idea that if you're in darkness, especially as you go through life, and you're going to come into situations where you're not going to know what's there. It's one thing to walk through your house in the dark and you kind of know where everything is, but usually we still end up stubbing our toe or running into something. And Jesus takes that to a spiritual level and says, that's how life is without me. Stumbling around, wandering around in darkness. Not realizing how far and where sin will take you. Not realizing choices that are made. In ignorance, in sin. Come to me for light. And then drop down to verse 46 of John 12. In 46, he says, I have come into the world as light, so that whoever believes in me may not remain in darkness. And that section, he's emphasizing the significance of his words. You'll be judged by my words, he says. Take my words and have life and have light. Light has this power to illuminate our path. And that is not only true in the physical sense, it's true when it comes to Jesus. Jesus is the light that reveals and illuminates. But then one more this morning. The light also has the power of destruction. Destruction. We're going to turn backward now to John chapter 1. The first chapter of John. John chapter 1 verses 4 through 13. I appreciate Gary reading a portion of the first part of this book for us earlier. Light and darkness are in that constant warfare. But it does not matter. Have you ever considered that light has no real power, or rather darkness has no real power over light? That it doesn't matter how, if you want to think about it, how dark it gets, how strong the darkness is. You take a candle, you take this match, if I can get it to light here. Whatever the light source is, it'll keep burning. Now this just went out, so that kind of ruined my point, right? The point is that it didn't go out because of the darkness. It takes some physical force. It takes the air conditioning or the wind or an actual physical movement to snuff the light out. Or it will keep burning in the case of a physical light until it runs out of fuel in some way. Whether you stop the oxygen or, in this case, if the match had burned longer, it would have burned through to the end. That's the power of light. It just keeps on burning. In the darkness, it only works when the light is gone. But as long as the light is there, darkness doesn't stand a chance. Let's read our passage, John chapter 1. Coming in here when he's describing this one who was from the beginning, in the beginning with God, the one who created everything. And then he says this, that in him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness. And now we reach the point in John's gospel. We're only 5 verses in, but it's the first time John uses the present tense. So far, it's all been about the past. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. He created all things. But now he says, almost like in the beginning when God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and the darkness is gone. Now there's darkness again in the creation. But he says the light shines presently, currently, in the darkness. The light of the world. And then says this, the end of verse 5, and the darkness has not, or even cannot, overcome it. We said it in the more obvious sense for us. We look at it, we hold the candle, we hold the light, and realize darkness can't stop this. John says that's true of the light of the world, of Jesus. Even though there was a point when the darkness appeared to have won. As Jesus references in John 12. I'm going to be here a little longer. But even that dark day, when the sun refused to shine, could not overcome the light. Look at verse 6 now of John 1. He says, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light. He came to bear witness about the light, the true light. There's other forms of light. There are other lights that are, but here's the genuine, real deal, the true light, which gives light to everyone. If you're going to have any real light, it's going to come from him. It's coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, but of God. John 1, 4 through 13. The light, revelation, illumination, and even destruction. Destruction because darkness wants to destroy the light. But in the end, the light destroys the darkness. Light is so important. You can look at what happens when we go days or weeks in some parts of the world without daylight, or what happens if you put someone in a dark space and you leave them there for an extended period of time. The health effects, the loss of vitamin D, the sleep cycle that goes completely haywire, the psychological effects. We need light. It is just as true, if not in some ways more true, that we need the God who is light. Now let's close this morning by considering from darkness to light. Let's go back to 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verses 7 through 11. John compares light and darkness as love and hate. He also brings in the statement about not knowing where you're going that Jesus says back in John chapter 12. But in 1 John 2, 7 through 11, we're reminded of walking in the sunshine on a beautiful spring day. We might not get a whole lot of those, but we usually get 1 or 2 days in the spring that are nice when it's not hot yet, but it's the sun's out and you walk. Maybe you might pick the morning time, the cool of the morning, or in the evening. That's what love is like. Love in my heart, other people who love me and care for me in my life, and love me like Jesus. But hate, John says, is like darkness. Hatred is like walking down the deserted road and you don't have the flashlight. It's like being locked in that dark room and left. That's what hatred's like. And you don't know where you're going. You might stand and oppose something just because you don't like the person who's involved. Darkness. It's one way that light and darkness are also contrasted for us here. Then we read this. Let's turn together to Ephesians chapter 5. And we read of the call to be children of light. Ephesians chapter 5, beginning at verse 7. Ephesians 5, 7 through 14. Because of the truth of light, because of purity of light, as God's people, as Christians, we've been called to come out of darkness into the light. And we've been called to be careful about our ongoing relationship, potentially, with darkness, to strive to be pure children of light. Here it is, Ephesians 5, verse 7. Therefore, do not become partakers or partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. And then take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness. So he describes here the fruit of light and then unfruitful actions or works of darkness. Just as in the physical realm, light is essential for plant life, photosynthesis. For my life, I have to have access to this, what is true and right and good, to grow spiritually. He says, don't take part in these unfruitful works of darkness, but instead, and here's that word again, expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret or in the dark. But anything is exposed by the light, becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, verse 14, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead. Another reminder of light and life and their connection. And Christ will shine on you. And then there's another reference to Romans chapter 13, 11 through 14 that is a similar call to come out of darkness and in to the light. To leave behind a life that is obsessed with self. To leave behind a life that is wrapped up in whatever feels good, whatever I think is good. And to come to God, who is the real light. Jesus, the true light of the world. And to look to someday. I put down Revelation 21 and 22. When John envisions coming city, the coming life with God, he says there's no sun, there's no moon, there's no lights in this city. Because, he says, the Lamb, the one who sits on the throne, are its lights. Can you imagine that day, someday, when we get to see our Savior face to face? We come out of darkness into His light now. But what will it be like to come into His light then? Someday. From darkness to light. God is light. We see the light in revelation, illumination, and destruction. And then we see our call as we repent, as we turn away from darkness, as we're baptized into Jesus, and as we then walk in this life. The call from darkness to light. The call to live as children of the day, not of the night, as we look to someday when I see the light home. The words of the song, "Here I am to worship," are fitting to end this sermon. Light of the world, you stepped down into darkness, opened my eyes, made me see beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Let's stand and sing together.